Sometimes people like to imagine what it would be like to stand on an alien planet. In our minds, those worlds usually look nothing like Earth. We picture jagged rocks, strange skies, bizarre life forms, and landscapes so unusual that they seem impossible. Alien planets are often imagined as hostile, mysterious, and completely unfamiliar. But there is a fascinating irony hidden in that imagination. Some of the strangest worlds ever to exist were not located in distant galaxies. They were right here on our own planet. The Earth you and I know today is only a tiny snapshot in an incredibly long history. Our planet has existed for about 4.5 billion years, and during that time it has gone through dramatic transformations. Changes so extreme that many ancient versions of Earth would look more alien to us than any world we can imagine. Mountains have risen and vanished. Oceans have opened and closed. Continents have drifted across the planet like giant floating puzzle pieces. Entire ecosystems have appeared, flourished, and disappeared. And if we traveled far enough back in time, we would encounter a period when Earth looked nothing like it does today. One of the strangest of those periods is known as the Silurian period. This chapter of Earth's history took place roughly 443 to 490 million years ago, long before dinosaurs, long before mammals, and even before forests as we know them today. In fact, the world of the Silurian would be almost unrecognizable to a modern human. If someone were suddenly transported there, they would feel as though they had landed on another planet entirely. To understand why, we need to look at the planet itself. A planet of scattered islands. The geography of Earth during the Silurian was drastically different from what we see today. Modern maps show large continents such as Africa, Asia, North America, and Australia. But hundreds of millions of years ago, these landmasses were arranged in completely different positions. The tectonic plates that slowly move the continents had not yet assembled the familiar shapes we recognize today. Instead of large continuous continents, the planet was dominated by scattered landmasses separated by vast oceans. Sea levels were significantly higher than today, about 100 meters, roughly 300 feet, higher. This meant that enormous portions of the continents were submerged beneath shallow seas. As a result, much of the dry land that existed appeared as clusters of islands rather than large continental masses. If you looked at a map of the world during this time, the central regions would show several important landmasses. Laurentia, which would eventually become much of North America. Baltica, a region that would later merge with parts of Europe. Avalonia, a smaller continent drifting nearby. Siberia, which was separate from modern Asia. Farther south lay an enormous supercontinent known as Gondwana. Gondwana was a massive landmass that included pieces of what are today Africa, Antarctica, Australia, South America, India, and parts of Asia. It covered nearly 1/5 of Earth's entire surface, making it far larger than any single modern continent. Surrounding all of these scattered lands was a gigantic global ocean known as Panthalassa. This ocean dwarfed even today's Pacific Ocean and stretched across most of the planet. From a human perspective, the Silurian world would feel like an endless ocean dotted with islands. A surprisingly pleasant climate. When people imagine ancient prehistoric Earth, they often picture chaotic environments filled with violent storms, volcanic eruptions, and extreme temperatures. But the Silurian climate was actually relatively stable. Global temperatures were generally warmer than modern averages, especially near the equator, where temperatures may have reached around 36 degrees Celsius 96 degrees Fahrenheit. However, these conditions were still milder compared to later prehistoric periods such as the Permian or Triassic, which experienced far more extreme climates. Because many landmasses were located near tropical regions, the Silurian world likely contained numerous warm island environments. If a time traveler somehow arrived during this era, the weather itself might actually feel quite pleasant. But the landscape would still be shockingly strange. The problem with soil. One of the most surprising aspects of the Silurian world is something we take for granted today: soil. Modern soil is created through the slow breakdown of rocks combined with organic material from plants, fungi, bacteria, and animals. But during the early stages of life on land, this complex system had not yet developed. As a result, much of the land surface during the Silurian consisted of bare rock, sand, clay, and dust. Without large plants and deep root systems, The land lacked the rich ecosystems that shape modern landscapes. Instead of forests, fields, and grasslands, the terrain would often appear barren and open. But this was beginning to change, because during the later stages of the Siluran, life on land was starting to experiment with new forms. And one of the strangest of these life forms would dominate the landscape: the giant trees that weren't trees. Imagine walking across a strange prehistoric landscape. The ground is mostly rocky and dusty, and the vegetation is sparse. Then suddenly you see something towering above everything else. At first glance, it might look like a tree, but something is wrong. There are no branches, no leaves, no visible bark. Instead, it looks like a gigantic spike rising from the ground. These structures were known as Prototax Sites. For decades, scientists believed Prototax Sites were enormous prehistoric fungi, essentially giant mushrooms without caps. Fossils discovered in North America, Europe, Australia, and parts of Asia revealed that these organisms could reach incredible sizes. Some specimens were estimated to grow up to 8 meters, around 26 feet, tall and about 1 meter, 3 feet, in diameter. During a time when most land plants were only a few centimeters tall, these towering structures completely dominated the landscape. If you were standing in a Siluran ecosystem, these giant spikes would be the tallest living things around. But recent research has complicated the story. Some scientists now believe Prototax Sites might not have been fungi at all. Chemical analysis of fossils suggests that their structure and composition do not perfectly match known fungal organisms. Instead, they might represent something even more unusual, a completely separate lineage of life that no longer exists today. In other words, the tallest life forms on Earth during the Siluran might belong to a biological group that has entirely vanished from the planet. That alone makes this period feel incredibly alien. Why these giant structures were important. Despite their strange appearance, these towering organisms may have played a crucial role in shaping early terrestrial ecosystems. Because soil was still poorly developed, nutrients on land were limited. Large organisms like Prototax Sites may have helped redistribute nutrients, water, and organic material across the landscape. This process would gradually help prepare the ground for more complex plant life. In a way, these mysterious organisms may have helped build the foundation for future forests. Early plants begin to appear. Although Prototax Sites dominated the skyline, other forms of plant life were beginning to evolve. One of the most common early land plants was Cooksonia, a tiny organism that looked nothing like modern plants. Instead of leaves or large stems, Cooksonia consisted of thin branching stalks that ended in small spore-producing structures. Most Cooksonia plants were only a few centimeters tall, but they represented an important evolutionary step: the gradual colonization of land by plant life. Over millions of years, these small plants would evolve into larger and more complex forms, eventually leading to the forests that cover the planet today. The first land animals. Plants were not the only pioneers exploring life on land. During the Siluran, the earliest terrestrial arthropods began appearing. These were small invertebrate creatures related to modern spiders, scorpions, and insects. One group known as trigonotarbids resembled early spiders. They had multiple body segments and 8 legs, but unlike modern spiders, they did not possess silk-producing organs. Their bodies were also protected by a hard, armored exoskeleton. Fortunately for any hypothetical time traveler, these creatures were relatively small, about the size of a modern wolf spider, and lacked venom. So while they might look intimidating, they would pose little danger to humans. The arrival of scorpions. Another group that appeared during the Siluran was the scorpions. Some early scorpions were still partially aquatic and likely spent much of their time near coastlines or shallow water. One species discovered in Canada grew to about 17 centimeters, around 6 to 7 inches, long, making it significantly larger than many other land animals of the time. These early scorpions probably hunted small arthropods and primitive insects. Although they were predators within their ecosystems, they were still far smaller than modern scorpions and would not have posed a serious threat to large animals. The oceans, a much more dangerous place. While life on land was still relatively small and harmless, the oceans told a very different story. Marine ecosystems had already been evolving for hundreds of millions of years, giving ocean creatures a massive evolutionary head start. One of the most dominant predators of the Silurian seas was a group known as eurypterids, often called sea scorpions. Despite the name, these animals were not true scorpions but distant relatives within the arthropod family. Some species were enormous. Certain eurypterids could grow over 2 meters, more than 6 feet, long, making them among the largest predators in the oceans at the time. They possessed powerful claws, segmented bodies, and sometimes paddle-like tails used for swimming. Some species likely hunted actively in open water, while others lurked on the seafloor waiting for prey to approach. Encountering one while swimming would have been a terrifying experience. The rise of eerily fish. The Silurian oceans were also home to a growing diversity of fish. Some of the earliest jawed fish were beginning to evolve, along with armored species known as placoderms. Many of these fish were small compared to modern species, but they represented an important evolutionary milestone. Fish were becoming more advanced, more mobile, and more capable predators. Over time, these early fish would give rise to many of the major vertebrate groups we know today, including the ancestors of amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals. A truly alien Earth. When we imagine alien worlds, we often think of landscapes filled with bizarre life forms and unfamiliar ecosystems. But the Silurian Earth proves that our own planet has already experienced environments just as strange. Towering mysterious organisms that may not belong to any known kingdom of life. Primitive plants barely taller than your hand. Small spider-like creatures exploring land for the first time. Giant sea scorpions patrolling ancient oceans. All of this existed hundreds of millions of years before the first dinosaur appeared. And yet, this strange and unfamiliar world was an important step in the story of life on Earth. Because during the Silurian, the foundations were being laid for something much bigger. Plants were learning to colonize land. Animals were beginning to follow. And in the next chapter of Earth's history, the Devonian period, life on land would explode into an entirely new level of complexity. But that is a story for another time.